All right, hello and welcome everyone to the first episode of Voice of the Young Republicans here on Voice of Republicans TV. What we're going to do here each week is give a platform and a voice to Republican candidates, activists, elected officials that might not otherwise get the media attention and the coverage they should, and definitely not the fair coverage they should get. So that's why you should tune in right here, and that's what we will give where other opportunities aren't existing. Thank you for tuning in with us for the first episode today. I'm Evan Young, National Committee Man of the Maryland Young Republicans.
And I'm Maria Sophia, Chairman of the Maryland Young Republicans. And we're joined tonight by our first ever guest, Dr. Shannon Wright. Shannon Wright is the nominee for the Republican ballot for the She's worked with several nonprofit community organizations and was able to gain a clear perspective of the fallout from lack of equality and equity in Black communities. Her work led her to be a negotiator on a $100 million desegregation plan with the NAACP. She served as the second vice chair she served as the Maryland Republican Party second vice chair. And she's currently the chair of the Baltimore City Republican Party and is running for mayor in 2020. So please give it up for Pastor Shannon Wright.
Shannon, thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. We just want to begin by giving you the floor to build on that great introduction. Just tell us a little about yourself, tell the viewers what you're running for this office, the reasons you're running, and the change you're bringing to Baltimore. Tell us a little about yourself.
So I'm a wife, a mom, and a grandma. And then one of the most important things were first God, second is family. I want to do whatever I can to help make Baltimore City safe and family friendly. And the last several administrations in the city have done the exact opposite of that. And my grandmother always said, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So I'm at a stage where I'm not beholden to anyone here in the city, like several other elected and wannabe electeds are, so that I can be in a position to do what's right for the people, because I know in my heart and in my spirit it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Pastor Wright. You emerged from an extremely competitive and crowded primary field to secure the nomination on the Republican side. How did your campaign connect with these voters to get you to this point in the way the other Republican candidates were not able to do in the primary?
So it's about taking the policy, taking the positions and translating them into everyday language. You know, when you talk about school choice, when you break it down for parents to understand, don't you want the best education you can get for your children? You know, when it's about Second Amendment, maybe you don't say Second Amendment, maybe you say, don't you want to feel safe in your house and in your community and in your neighborhood? You know, and you connect to people, you talk to them, you bring the issues to them in a way that they can relate and understand, and it resonates.
Thank you, Pastor Wright. We're going to jump into a very short break here. As soon as we get back, we're going to dive into how Mayor Wright will handle the issues facing Baltimore once she is elected.
Baltimore deserves better. Brandon Scott's been at City Hall for years, and what do we have to show for it? Homicide rates above 300 for the last 5 years. Where's Brandon Scott? Public property being defaced. Where's Brandon Scott? Statues being torn down. Where's Brandon Scott? 24 poor-performing schools in the state of Maryland, 12 of them right here in Baltimore City. Where's Brandon Scott? Good leadership is clear, visible, and present. In my administration as mayor, we will work together to be solutions-driven. Mayoral debates coming up. It's an election cycle. Where's Brandon Scott? Haven't seen him since the primary. Baltimore deserves better. My name is Shannon Wright, and with your help and your vote, the next mayor of Baltimore. My name is Shannon Wright, and I approve this message.
So, Pastor Shannon Wright, a lot of citizens have asked what happened to their money that was misspent and misspent. What will you do to rectify this situation and make sure that the citizens of Baltimore will no longer have to pay high prices for the incompetence of city officials?
It's my belief. So can tell you anything. And in all honesty, I have to show you. So many people have run for office in Baltimore City and said all kinds of things, and then done the exact opposite. Case in point is my Democrat opponent, Brandon Scott, said he wanted fair equity in government. So he wanted to make sure that the extra votes that the mayor controls on the board of estimates were gone, and he wanted to push for term limits for elected officials. He said those things, the voters loved it, won the primary, and has since taken them back. So I think at this point, voters need to see, and they need to watch, and they need to hear from others their reaction to what we're doing. So for us, we're campaigning now, not just talking about what we're going to do, but starting to do some of those things now. We had an opportunity to bring one of the representatives from the SBA into the city to host a town hall with them so that business owners could actually understand some of the things that they could do to access some of the CARES funds and be able to survive COVID. We've had folks from health agencies come into the city to explain to folks how to stay safe during COVID. So instead of just talking about what I would do and what I will do, I'm showing that now by what we are doing.
You're right. When it comes to Baltimore, there's not been a Republican mayor in over 60 years. Why has the city been under such intense one-party rule for decades? And how is your campaign going to change that? And what does your campaign provide for the citizens of Baltimore that these Republican candidates in the past who have tried but failed for 60 years? What's different about your approach and your message and what you'll actually do once elected leading the city?
So the folks in Baltimore have allowed themselves to be led by one party rule, as you said, for a long, long time now. The last Republican mayor left office in 1967. When we have Republicans that have been running in the city, they haven't done one of the simple things that we do in church, which is what you say, is you meet people where they are. It's important to understand the issues, not from a philosophical standpoint, but actually meet with people, talk with people, be here in the city. It's not just give your own thoughts and ideas, but really listen to hear what the voters want. That's what we did in the primary, and that's what we're going to continue to do. I can't lead you and do what you want me to do as your representative if I don't stop, be quiet, and listen to you to hear what it is that you as a voter want. So it's as much listening, if not more, than talking.
Just to follow up there, I know campaigns probably been adapted more than you would have expected because of the pandemic going on right now, and you just can't be out there talking to voters, going door to door, maybe like you would have wanted to early on. But that listening and meeting them where they are, how are you able to adapt and still accomplish that goal in your campaign with the pandemic going on?
So you could probably ask me that question better November 5th, because I'll have a real clear answer to that then. Yeah. But prayerfully, we're doing that by reaching out to folks online. Like, for example, community associations. Several of them are still meeting. They're meeting by Zoom. So we participate in those. Several community groups, not just community associations, are also meeting by Zoom. Several organizations are doing things virtually, and we're doing our best as time permits, because I haven't figured out how to put the extra hours in the day yet. But as time permits, we're trying to participate in all of them. One of the networks here in the city and in the state, Fox 45, has committed to hosting the first mayoral debate of the season going into the general, and it's going to be virtual. So there are a lot of things that are still going on. They're just going on in very different ways. So it's a serious learning curve for sure.
And I would think that a candidate who can adapt to the circumstances going on now and find new ways to still connect to the voters, that's going to be very important in leading as mayor and finding a new way forward for a city that definitely needs one. So to find a new way forward in a campaign and connect in new ways, that can translate very well once elected to connecting with those constituents and actually getting the changes that you want to see enacted. We're going to jump to another quick break. As soon as we come back, we're going to talk about many of the issues facing Baltimore, crime, economics, and how Mayor Pastor Wright will handle that when we get back.
All right, so we're back, and Pastor Shannon Wright, I want to talk a little bit about your primary. I know you had a very crowded primary, and you were up against several Republican candidates, I think more so this past cycle than there have been in past cycles for people running for mayor on the Republican side. And you had, like I said, you had a very crowded primary field. So what do you think set your campaign apart than from the other campaigns that allowed you to get across the finish line to make yourself the nominee this year?
The first answer would be hard work. Very little sleep and a lot of hard work. I had the opportunity to work with a group of folks here in the state that helped me in the city. You might know them, the Maryland Young Republicans. And I learned a lot from watching you guys.
Well, thank you.
I stole some plays from your playbook. But
We
it's
did
really
not
got a lot
that
of hard
answer, by the way, but we appreciate it, and we'll take it.
Not at all. And I know we had that mayoral debate earlier this year with that in that crowded primary where there were several candidates. You had invited all those candidates as well. So I want to thank you, obviously, Pastor Shannon Wright, for running, and you ran a great primary campaign for that. So thank you. And we certainly enjoyed helping you and the candidates that won for us. So.
Yeah, we found.
You all coming.
I'm sorry. I was just saying we found a good purpose here and doing these episodes and all of our outreach efforts that are candidates that deserve a platform and deserve to get their message out. But oftentimes, as you've I'm sure experienced in your campaign so far, people don't want to show up and give you that platform. I remember the Democratic primary debates for mayor's race. Massive coverage, television screens, wall-to-wall coverage. When we did our forum, there was some media there, but still they just don't want to give you a platform and hear these alternative views and these alternative ideas. It brings me to actually a question that I'm very interested in hearing. How have you said you're doing a lot online and you're meeting people where they are? Have you had any dealings with any of the media in Baltimore about them either being very reluctant and obvious in their reluctance to give you a platform and get your message out? And how have you worked around that, if so?
Well, interestingly enough, in the last couple of weeks, we haven't had to work around it as much. I've been on Fox 45 every week, at least once or twice a week. The Baltimore Sun is starting to pick up some of our comments and request statements on issues in the city, as well as several other outlets and periodicals and all that sort of thing. Matter of fact, I'm scheduled to be on Fox 45 tomorrow morning. The media, it's interesting, this cycle, the media is actually acknowledging that they're a Republican candidate. Somewhat of a platform, it's a voice to not just my own campaign, but other Republican candidates as well.
That's awesome. That's amazing, and it's a good sign because it's not something we've always seen even earlier this year. I want to get into an important issue facing Baltimore and really facing the entire nation right now. In today's society, we see the Black Lives Matter movement calling for the defunding of police, as well as the reorganization of police departments. With Baltimore already having come under scrutiny with the Florida jail incident, do you think we should defund and reorganize police, or should we let the police do their jobs and continue their work in keeping the street safe? How would your approach as mayor be towards our police department in Baltimore City?
So I think it's kind of a combination of things. The community has lost a lot of its faith and trust in the police department in Baltimore City. Crime is on the rise across several different categories of crime. So I think, you ever heard that phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater? So we're having some issues with crime. So obviously we need to reorganize, but I don't think in doing that with the crime rate so high, especially that you defund the one entity that is supposed to be policing and keeping you safe. So I think that for me, that's counterintuitive when the crime rates are going up. So Do I believe there needs to be some reorganization? Yes. Do I believe that the numbers in the crime stats show that there are we're missing some things? Yes. Do I think defunding is the answer? No, absolutely not. When you look at, I will say this, the overtime in the budget for the police department in the last several years has been growing and is a lot higher than it should be. I believe that there is some reorganization to be able to stretch and use resources more effectively, to be able to include more training for the officers, to expand community policing, to start to rebuild that trust between the police and the community. But to defund the police, by the definition of the word, means not diminish, not make small, means take away. How do you do that when you have a crime rate, when you have a homicide rate that rivals any other city in this country? It doesn't make sense.
And just to follow up there, last year and dating back at least a year now, we had been together at some of those Baltimore cleanup efforts where they are just citizens and people coming from around the state and even out of state that just wanted to take some action, get their hands dirty where leaders have failed there. And in conversations as we were talking to the residents of these neighborhoods, what they seem to be looking for and what they were asking for and what they just want to see happen in the community around them is not the same as what we see on television and what some of these activist groups are calling for. They're not really taking the position that people that actually live in those neighborhoods are looking for. In your conversations as a candidate with people in these communities and in these neighborhoods in Baltimore City, are you seeing any push from them or any desire from them to defund the police and eliminate the law enforcement that is there? Or are they taking more of the approach that you've echoed, which is, yeah, there is some change needed and things that need to be improved on, but they do want law enforcement. They want law and order. They want rules enforced in their neighborhoods. Would that be correct?
That's absolutely correct. When you get caught up in the emotional moment of a protest, you know, things that make sense in the heat of that moment when the adrenaline is pumping really usually don't after that stops. And this is one of those things. I understand the emotion where the whole defund the police movement came from. I do. I get it. But even in the midst of those protests where people were calling to defund the police, when the protests got out of hand, when fires were started, when looting was going on, who did they call? They didn't call Ghostbusters, they called the police. So you can't criticize the very entity to their face and then call on them to help you and then take their funds away so they have the resources to do it anyway. It's counterintuitive.
I wish
we need to rebuild trust.
Exactly.
Feel comfortable and go at it from that perspective.
What a refreshing common sense view.
Right, exactly. So, Pastor Wright, when Horseshoe Casino was brought before the city council and the state legislature, it was meant to help fund city schools with its taxes. It has been several years, and still our schools do not see a single dime that's helped our inner city schools. Should we have the Horseshoe Casino shut down, or should we enforce the taxes that come from the casino back into schools?
So I'm going to say some things that will probably get me in trouble, but that's okay. I'm a big girl now. I can handle it. When that agreement was written up, it was written up in the same vein that a lot of Baltimore City contracts and negotiation deals are made up with, which is it resembles Swiss cheese. So there are so many holes for the casino to be able to jump through that they're not actually violating the contract per se. There are loopholes about the percentage being of their revenue, of their profits. But now, if you are able to move things in a way that you are not declaring profits, then you don't have funds that need to be given to that entity that they were promised to. Baltimore City has a history and a habit of doing that. It saddened my heart to see some of the legislation that came out of the city council this year. They argued with the fact that the city solicitor even said, half these things you folks want to do aren't legal. Just listen, let that marinate for a minute. You're passing resolutions you're drafting amendments, you're doing all these things based on your thought and the emotional value of all of you being for reelection, I'll say it, not even the law. So you're writing things, you're doing things, you're entering into agreements that are illegal from the beginning. That has to change. And under my administration, as the next mayor of Baltimore, it will.
Yeah, and I think, we saw some good common sense legislation come from the state legislature with the lockbox legislation that the governor was supportive of. And when we talk about enforcing that, I mean, I don't know if you want to touch on that just a little bit of if you support or how you feel about that, but the governor has been very frontward facing about this kind of issue with accountability, particularly with our schools financially.
So it seems to me that the governor has tried to give funds and resources to Baltimore for schools, and he's tried to just put a layer of accountability in because the leadership in Baltimore for the last several administrations has shown that sometimes the maturity level and the responsibility level isn't there to be able to handle those funds. I get it. And you can't really be mad at it. If the city was doing what it needed to do, then the amount of money that comes into this city per student, we would not have students still in buildings with no heat in the wintertime, no cooling in the summertime, some places no books, more holes in the roof that look like you got indoor swimming pools, and more rodents than anybody should ever have to deal with. These are not conditions that are adequate. The amount of money that comes in is more than a lot of private schools' tuitions. So it is clear that that money is not getting into the classrooms. So the only thing that you can do, because you don't want to pull the funds from the students, is put in some sort of accountability mechanism to hope that ensure that more of that money actually makes it to the classroom. It's not getting there now.
And that your answer right there, leads in and already begins to answer what my next question was going to be as we're on this education topic. There are a school principal in Baltimore, based on tenure, can earn more than the governor of Maryland per year. We have leadership in the Baltimore City Schools that are seeing record high compensation packages, record high salaries. Yet there are students that before the pandemic couldn't go to school because either they couldn't melt the icicles off the windows or they couldn't guarantee the kids wouldn't go to heat stroke sitting in school in the late spring and early summer. As mayor, how much power do you have when it comes to holding accountable the people in the Baltimore City schools and really demanding that the funding go towards things like a safe learning environment or a building with air conditioning and heating, and not these wild compensation packages for people that really don't even deserve to be allowed on the property based on what they've done?
So there's a couple of things. The mayor's hands are somewhat tied in terms of actually being able to have direct input. There are a lot of ways of indirect input. For example, as mayor, heck, even as a private citizen, if there are things that the school board are doing or not doing that they should be doing, you speak about it, you talk about it, you make a noise. You don't just let it go. When you look at compensation packages, the number escapes me right now, but I can tell you the current person that handles the Board of Education here makes a ridiculously high salary. She just got a raise. She's making, I believe it's $20,000 less than the chancellor in New York. Only he has millions of students, and Baltimore City has less than 100,000. And there are those that would argue they're not even getting a good education. So it seems to me that we are not getting our bang for the buck. As mayor, I will lobby both in the city and the state and federal to be able to override and overrule the current local Board of Education where it is clear by statistics that they are failing our students. When you see test scores continuing to plummet, when you see the overall condition of the buildings continue to be that which you would be hard pressed to be able to concentrate on then there needs to be a mechanism in place where the leadership in the city can say, okay, hey, hold on, let's hit the pause button. We need some outside eyes on this. This is not working. And I would lobby hard, both at the city and the state and the federal level, for that kind of a mechanism to be put in place. Our students are graduating. When they do graduate, rates are dropping. And when our students do graduate, they are not on a level playing field with other students from other schools in the state or across the country. We are doing a complete disservice to the students in Baltimore City and schools. And as mayor, I'm not going to tolerate that. I will be as loud as I need to. I will, from the Board of Education headquarters if I need to, whatever it takes. Education is a priority. We have a city where we have a large low-income population. We have income gaps all over the place. The only way, not the only way, but the best way, the best self-sustaining way to change that and turn that around is a quality education. We owe that to the children in this city.
And that's a message that, regardless of your politics or your party or your ideology, if you're a parent or ever want to be a parent in Baltimore City, that's a message that should resonate with you more than pretty much any other issue. When we get back, we're going to have a short break here, but when we get back, we are not out of hot topic and hot button issues for Baltimore City. There are a lot of them facing the city, and we've still got more to cover in just a minute here on Voice of Young Republicans.
Baltimore. We are standing here at the Board of Education, and as you can see, it's pretty much deserted, with the exception of those using it as a community parking lot. It's July, so you would expect that there'd be a little bit of activity because of summer school and planning for the fall. But this year, because of COVID, the fall for school is going to look very different. This year, the Board of Education had its first town hall to discuss their plans for bringing students safely back to school in the fall. And just to be clear and cut straight to the point, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for you, parents in this city. There are two options, either a completely online option or a hybrid option, which is 2 days in school and 3 days out of the building, and students broken down into two cohorts. Now the problem for that is, as we try to open up the economy and parents have to go back to work 5 days a week, and their children are only in school 2 days, that doesn't add up. So, as mayor, it will be my responsibility to work with the state delegation and the city officials and the Board of Election to try and make sure that we have solutions that actually work for families, that work for parents. 2 days in school, 3 days out, with no viable options, doesn't work. So what we have to do is come up with viable solutions that actually work for parents that are trying to return to work. As it is, most of our black and brown families in this city are first line in some way, shape, form, or fashion, which means you don't have the option of being able to work from home. So as your next mayor, it's my responsibility, my obligation, and my duty to be clear, visible, and present with solutions that work for families. Education with 2 days on and 3 days off doesn't meet that threshold. So together, I will be your voice, and together we will find solutions that actually work for families in this city so that we can take Baltimore in a new direction. My name is Shannon Wright, and with your help, your support, and your vote, the next mayor of Baltimore City. My name is Shannon Wright, and I approve this message.
So, Pastor Wright, with 2019 holding the record of 348 homicides, and this year there's already been 174 homicides, what are you planning to do, or do you have a crime plan to stop on our street in Baltimore?
When you look at crime, and specifically homicide and the numbers that they are, you have to do a couple of things. You have to make sure that you've got a police department that's in working order and actually equipped to be able to handle that crime. And then you have to look at the root causes. Just fixing the police department will not solve the problem. That is putting a Band-Aid on the problem. You have to get to the root of the problem. And statistics will say, forget politics and parties. Statistics say the people in Baltimore have lost hope. Companies are leaving Baltimore, jobs are leaving Baltimore, taxes are going up, quality of life is going down, people have lost hope. They've lost opportunity, they've lost faith, they have no more faith in their leadership. So when you are in a position where you still have to put food on the table and keep a roof over your head, and you see no opportunities and no other options, sometimes you look at things that you ordinarily wouldn't. So what we need to do, and in my administration, what we will do, is make sure that we bring opportunities back into the city so that we reestablish hope in the city, so that people believe that their children can have a better future. That is not the belief here in the city right now. So in addition to doing things like being tough on crime, and I absolutely mean being tough on crime, you also have to look at the root cause of the crime and look at the responsibility that the past failed administrations in the city have had to lead to a climate where people feel they got to do what they got to do. And the leadership needs to fix that, and we need to hold people accountable for their individual actions. The two have to go hand in hand.
And just kind of continuing off of that with crime in the city, we've been seeing a lot of statues being defaced across the country, but the latest, obviously, Baltimore City, what are your thoughts and takeaways that you have going on regarding that? And what do you plan to do as mayor? What are your thoughts on it?
So a lot of the destruction has come from protests, and those protests have gone awry. They've kind of taken a turn somewhere and gone into not constitutional constructive protests, but really into let's see who can be the most destructive. There's a couple things that need to happen. Number one, I understand the value of protests. I've been in many myself. I wouldn't begrudge anybody being in a protest. However, when you go from being a protester to being someone that is engaging in criminal activities and behavior by being destructive, defacing property, then you've crossed the line. Now, to the folks that feel, I don't understand where they're coming from with that. Last I checked, I'm a Black woman, have been for a while now. I grew up in the projects without a silver spoon. So to say that I am out of touch or maybe I don't understand is a bunch of, well, it's TV, so I won't say. Regardless of your circumstances and your issues, it doesn't give you any excuse to do the things that people are doing. And I would say also to the people that are defacing the statues, taking a hunk of metal and granite and stone and destroying it and throwing it in the water is not going to change what happened. It's not going to change what made you angry. That statue is a symbol. But again, if you don't get to the root of the problem, that is still, these things that have led to this powder keg atmosphere are going to continue. The statue didn't do nothing to nobody. It's a piece of stone. And the person that statue represents, there's nobody alive now that remembers what he did anyway. So y'all mad about stuff that's happening today. But again, destroying that statue, breaking windows, burning things down is not going to change the fact that if this is your concern, that you're still poor, you're still Black, you're still broke, and your kids still go to a crappy school. Now, if you want to really have a conversation about that and fix some things, let's talk. See, we could do it the real grown folk way. We can sit down, we can break bread, we can actually have some conversation and some communication and fix things. But when you go on this destructive path, then first I got to stop you. And by the time I stop you, I may not really care what led you to that path. If this is really about doing these things to create a climate for solutions, then you need to stop short of alienating people to the point where you don't care what your reason is or don't care that you want a solution.
And to follow up on that, how do we get back to that where we can all have our disagreements and you can have, a statue stay up crowd versus a statue has to come down crowd, but when it comes down to it, everyone can still focus on those actual issues instead of retreating back to their corners and just having to be on the attack against people who on this issue or that issue may see differently. I think back to when the George Floyd murder first happened. I don't know anybody who thought that video was anything but horrible. Yet the way things have unraveled since then, people have gotten very divided on the protests and these movements as a whole, when not too long ago, everybody was on the same side. What happened to that man was terrible, and that officer could be held accountable. But human nature and division and having to be on the attack against somebody, even when they agree with you, has sort of unraveled and really harmed a lot of progress that can take place. How does Mayor Wright get us going in the right direction there when you will be in a city with a lot of people who are just going to want to fight you on everything?
So I'm trying to be politically correct and find the right words here. I was raised to believe that only fight as children and dogs, and I'm neither. So I'm not going to waste my time, my energy, or these resources on that. Now, when we want to talk about solutions, I'm all for it. Doors always open. We're not going to have destructive behavior. I'm going to be real with y'all for a second, because I'm running for office in Baltimore, and I want to speak to the folks that I'm going to make sure get to see this video in Baltimore. For my folks in Baltimore that are concerned about the way things are going, this is what needs to happen. Some of them OGs sitting around watching some of these young bloods out here doing this stuff, y'all need to get up off your butt, off the stoop, go out and talk to somebody, raise some of these young kids, help some of these young brothers that don't have a father in their house, show them the way to go. Not just sit back, talk about after the fact, once they've been locked up, oh, they shouldn't have been locked up. Well, how about if you see something, say something, and better yet, go do something. Prevent is better than cure. So to my OGs on the block, sitting back, just, upset and angry, try to be a part of the solution. How about that? That would be my message to folks in Baltimore.
I love it. And that is a message that I think would actually connect with people a lot more than just trying to tiptoe around the issues and say it seems to be politically correct. Just tell like it is and cut straight to the point, and that's what you're doing. That's why I think it's going to continue to connect with voters. Being angry on the internet or being angry sitting on the sidelines chirping doesn't really do anything if you're not willing to get in the fight and get your hands dirty and do something yourself instead of waiting around to see how people do it. And so I love that that's your message, and it's going to connect with a lot of people that have felt just completely forgotten about in Baltimore for a long time. We're going to get to one more quick break. When we come back, we'll have a parting word and a parting shot, and we will wrap up here on Voice of Young Republicans.
My name is Shannon Wright, and I'm running for mayor of Baltimore. Right now, we're on a typical street in Baltimore City, flanked on both sides by small businesses. Small businesses are the lifeblood of the economic engine of our city. As leaders, we need to make sure that we are removing the roadblocks to creating more businesses. More businesses means more jobs, and that is one of my main goals as the next mayor of Baltimore City. Remove the roadblocks, create more opportunities for small business so they can create more jobs for us and for you, the citizens of Baltimore City. My name is Shannon Wright. Better business opportunities, more jobs, less crime, better education. That's my vision for Baltimore City. Shannon Wright for mayor of Baltimore. My name is Shannon Wright, and I absolutely approve this message.
So, Pastor Wright, I know we're winding down here, but I want to talk a little bit about the exodus of people in Baltimore City. There have been so many people that have left the city because of the lack of economic jobs, and we talked about education and just things that are driving people out of the city. So, how do we get this back to the city and attract talent and the arts, everything else that makes it so vibrant and its culture? How do we bring that back?
So I apologize. The internet was breaking up a little bit, but I'm thinking that I heard you say that there's been somewhat of an exodus from the city because of crime, because of lack of opportunities, lack of jobs, and how do we turn that around? In a nutshell, is that what you were? Okay.
Absolutely.
So again, it goes back to, we have to do three things. We have to improve the schools, we have to make the streets safer, and we have to create a business-friendly climate. So I'm gonna talk specifically to the business-friendly climate for a minute. Baltimore City has gone so far off the path, off the track, throughout the map, the diagram, and everything else. Recently, the city council president, who is my opponent, the Democratic nominee for mayor, drafted and pushed through a resolution requiring a series of businesses here in the city, restaurants, to abolish their dress codes. So I want that to marinate for a minute. The city council passed a resolution telling business owners that they have to get rid of their dress codes. So we're in a situation right now in the city of Baltimore where our economy has been going down because people have been leaving the city. Businesses have been leaving the city. There are more abandoned buildings in a city of this size than I've seen in any other city across the country. Now, at a time like that, when the one thing that you have that you can count on to be able to drive that turnaround in the city is small business, and allowing them to be the economic engine that they are created and supposed to be, to then handicap them by telling them how to run their business, I would say to any elected officials that feel that that's the way good government should look, you need to go sit down, be quiet for a minute, read the city charter, and take your hand out of business owners' pockets. Now, if you were able to do what you're supposed to do, which is remove the roadblocks so that the city could grow on its own, we wouldn't have to be trying to attract corporations into the city and give away the storehouse with all the tips and the pilots. Now, those tips and those pilots and that money that you put out to attract these businesses, they could be funding recreation centers. They could be funding mentoring programs. They could be funding rehab programs, funding rehab programs. But no, you all want to give away the storehouse instead of actually doing the job, doing the work to make Baltimore an economically friendly city so that people want to come here, stay here, and grow their businesses here. We need a change in leadership from the top to the bottom, not just my administration as the next mayor, but in city council president, and across the board. We need a paradigm shift. This city, before COVID, was dangerously close to entering into receivership, and not too many people know that. The economic situation in the city was going in the wrong direction before COVID. After COVID, we're on that precipice of being the next Detroit. So the reality is that the leadership that comes in next, and I'm not trying to be ageist, and, especially since I'm talking to some very intelligent young folk right here. However, my Democratic opponent needs to sit in the corner and let grown folk handle some business. When you talk about you've been here, you've grown up in the leadership and the administrations, each one of which that you tout as where you got your experience from and your expertise from is a failed leadership with failed legislation, you need to sit down and be quiet. You are part of the problem why the city is going in the wrong direction. It is time for a new leadership, not just a new name and a new face, but a paradigm of thought that we know actually works, not because I said so or somebody else said so, but because the facts say so. There are certain principles that are missing in this city. If you're a city on in an economic crisis, you don't give away the storehouse to get in business, because the revenue you would get in those taxes, you've given away to get them in the door. You make them promise to give something back to the community, which they don't, because your contracts are shaped again like Swiss cheese, as I referenced earlier. So their loopholes are there. The community does not benefit. The citizens do not benefit. For everybody that lives in Maryland, you may feel this is not your issue and your problem, but I will tell you this. Y'all listening? Whether you can vote for me or not, if you have friends in the city, I suggest you tell them to vote for me. If you have some discretionary cash, I suggest you deposit it in my campaign, and I'm going to tell you why. You can either support my campaign to be the next mayor of Baltimore, or you can continue to pay for Baltimore in your taxes and in legislation that comes out of our delegation from this city for the next 4 years. If you look at the legislation and you look at how much of the state's funds go to propping up and supporting Baltimore, you'd be amazed. So you can either donate now or pay for it for the next 4 years. The choice is yours. The tide raises all ships, but the ships with the holes still sink. And Baltimore's got a bottom like Swiss cheese right now. We need to fix that.
Well, Pastor Ray, thank you so much for joining Evan and I this week on Voice of Young Republicans. I just wanted to give you a moment if you've got any final thoughts or any closing statements regarding your run for the mayor of City of Baltimore, and maybe provide your information if people want to reach out to you to donate. How do they get in contact with you?
So if you are inclined to support this campaign, you can go to writeforbaltimore.com, or on Facebook, you can also reach us at Write for Baltimore. We're also the same on Twitter and Instagram. And as far as closing statements, sometimes you got to do this thing called tell the truth and shame the devil. So I'm going to put it to you all like this. We're in the city of Baltimore, right? Businesses are leaving. one of the entities that made news most recently for leaving the city of Baltimore is the NAACP. The NAACP started in the Midwest. They moved to New York at the beginning of the last century, and they've been there until they moved to Baltimore. Now, I've been a member of the NAACP and a state board member on a couple of different states and worked on some very large decisions and cases. Now, we covered cases and we worked on cases with regards to education. We worked on police misconduct. We worked on inequity in terms of housing, in terms of jobs and opportunities. Now, the education cases that we worked on in other states rival the lack of education and the misuse and mismanagement that you see here in Baltimore. The amount of police conduct cases that we worked on in other places are very similar to the cases you see here in Baltimore. And the inequity that you see, the systematic inequity and racism, and not just racism, but classism, because that's really what it is, that you see in other places, in other cities, you see here in Baltimore. But let me just put it to you like this. When the folk that are doing that to you, that have their knees someplace that's prohibiting you from breathing, look like you, so that the NAACP's hands are tied and they gotta leave, you know you're doing something wrong. Baltimore needs to turn around and change direction.
Pastor Wright, thank you for keeping it real with us today and keeping it real with the voters in Baltimore City that sometimes need to hear the tough truth, even when it isn't pretty or convenient to hear. But that's the only way that you're going to make progress, is by telling people the truth. And your campaign is about telling the truth. So in my completely unbiased opinion, anyone that's watching this should go directly to Pastor Shannon Wright's social media and website and get involved with her. I want to thank you, Pastor Wright, for being our first guest on Voice of Young Republicans. You're going to be mayor of Baltimore, but you also get the distinction of being our first guest. I'll leave it up to you which one you put first in your legacy when the time comes. But both very great honors in my opinion, and we can't wait to get behind you the rest of the fall and see you become mayor of Baltimore and bring some very much needed change. Thank you everyone for joining us on our first episode here on Voice of Republicans. Be sure to follow us across all of the social media, all of the Voice of Republicans social media channels. Maria, anything to add?
No, I just want to thank Pastor Shannon Wright for joining us this week. This has truly been a great time chatting with you, and looking forward to helping you this fall. I know our young Republicans are ready to go, and I know throughout this COVID-19, we're still trying to help our candidates the very best we can. So we certainly wish you all the best, and we'll continue to help you every way that we can.
Thank you, and I wish you guys much success in what you're doing. You're bringing a voice to an audience that needs it, and to folks that haven't heard it. So continue to do what you're doing.
Thank you. You heard the woman. Join us every week here on Voice of Young Republicans, and we will continue to give that platform and that voice to candidates and Republicans that really need it and deserve it. Because no matter your politics, you deserve to know the truth and to hear it directly from the candidates and the activists and the elected officials' mouths. And that's the opportunity we're giving everyone each week right here on Voice of Young Republicans. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to Voice of Republicans TV, where we bring you politicians, activists, and candidates straight with no slant. Please like and subscribe our channel as we bring you new episodes every week. We're here today with special guest, Congressman Andy Harris of Maryland's 1st Congressional District. We'll be speaking with the Congressman about everything from protests, riots, civil unrest, the economy, and the COVID-19 response, and what Congress is doing to help us out of the situation.
Congressman Andy Harris has spent his life serving his neighbors, his country, and his community, whether it was as a physician at Johns Hopkins, or as a medical officer in the Naval Reserve, or as a state senator, and now as your congressman. Congressman Andy Harris has been serving the 1st Congressional District since 2010 and has continued to serve his constituents with dignity, honor, and commitment.
Good evening, Congressman, and thank you for joining us here.
It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Let's get right into it. The Black Lives Matter movement has shined a light nationally on policing and policing practices and how our police departments are run. We've seen some cities like Minneapolis already commit to disbanding their police, while others are looking at defunding. Question for you is, should this be handled at a state level, a federal level? What should the role be of the federal government in the way these police departments are handled and their ability to either disband or defund police locally?
Sure. So first of all, we already have methods in place and laws in place that make what happened in to George Floyd a federal offense. That is, basically, we have civil rights violations. Pretty clearly, civil rights were infringed there. And so those laws are already in place, but and that should probably be the limit of the extent of federal involvement. The bottom line is that law enforcement is generally, in most instances, a very localized function where the police department knows best what works best in the communities in which they operate. And of course, we have to remember that being a law enforcement officer is just one of the toughest jobs in the world. You never know what you're going to come up against on the shift you have. You never know what kind of dangerous person you're going to come in contact with. And although it's cliched, it's true. When you leave your family in the morning, they don't know whether they're going to see you at the end of your shift. So the overwhelming percent of our officers, our law enforcement officers, our men and women in uniform do a great job. They're doing the appropriate job. And I believe we already have protections in place that deal with the times when an officer, like the officer involved in the George Floyd incident, acts very inappropriately.
Thank you, Congressman Harris, which leads us to a follow-up question. So do you believe that police should be defunded when we need more police now, especially when we need training and money for non-lethal weapons and responses?
Absolutely. So your point is absolutely correct. The bottom line is, if anything, we actually need more funding right now for two reasons. One is that the last few weeks have shown an increasing trend of violence, and you don't solve violence with less police activity. That just doesn't work. And if you think, for instance, that our police are not trained adequately, for instance, in cultural differences, in how to deal and how to de-escalation, things like that, how to deal with psychologically or psychiatrically impaired patients, then the answer is more training, which takes funding, not less funding. That is a foolish endeavor that doesn't lead to good results. And to be honest with you, we're seeing those results in some of the major American cities led by liberal Democrats.
And you touched on it in your response there for what my follow-up was going to be, is we've seen recently spikes in violence in major cities and increasingly disturbing spikes in violent crimes in these major cities. I would think that even Democrats don't actually think that you can somehow reduce these crime rates by removing the law enforcement. What do you think is actually the end game here, I guess is the way to put it, as far as trying to remove police officers when we're seeing less strict policing is already increasing violence? Where do you think this is headed?
Look, I'm going to disagree with you to some extent. I think there really are people who do believe that you actually have less crime with fewer police. I don't understand that logic. I never understand that logic, but there are some people who truly believe that that's true. And I think that's very, very dangerous. I think a vast majority of Americans believe that the thin blue line is in fact there to protect them, and that without that thin blue line, we will have anarchy.
So, Congressman Harris, some people are saying that the Black Lives Matter movement is a destructive organization, and we've seen the destruction of statues like in Maryland, the Christopher Columbus statue, and others around the country. So what is the appropriate response for people that are destroying property through rioting?
Sure. So, we have to separate what we'll call the Black, and I'll put in air quotes, the Black Lives Matter movement from the Black Lives Matter Foundation, after which it's named, which is clearly a Marxist organization that is intent on destroying the nuclear family, things like this. It is not in any way, shape, or form what they stand for is not going to result in the improvement of America or in a decrease in racism in America. But again, if you want to peacefully protest that in fact racism, some elements of it still clearly exist in America right now, that's fine. But when you cross the line into violence, whether it's violence by throwing a Molotov cocktail, looting and breaking into a store, destroying a statue, pulling down a statue. In the case in Baltimore, pulling down a Christopher Columbus statue, throwing it into the, which was bought with private donations, and throwing it into the Inner Harbor. I've got to tell you, that's a crime. It should be a federal crime if it involves federal monuments, and we should strictly enforce that law to stop that behavior.
Thank you, Congressman. And we see these lines blurred, getting very blurry between Confederate monuments. Then it moved into founding father monuments, and now we've even seen statues to men like Frederick Douglass be targeted and Abraham Lincoln targeted. Do you think there's a certain way that we should deal with those who actually do want to see those Confederate monuments moved to a museum or elsewhere, as opposed to the founding father monuments that not too long ago President Trump was heckled for suggesting that that's who they'd come after next? Do you see a way that we can deal with the two groups of statues differently and sort of keep everyone happy?
Well, what we have to add now, of course, is we're seeing actually statues in churches being destroyed as well. So this has gone well beyond Civil War statues. Look, the first rule has to be you can't destroy anything that's not yours. You just can't do it. In this country, that's illegal, should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, which means that if you want to have these statues removed, there are ways to do it. These statues, again, and if it's a private statue, such as a statue at a church, I'm sorry, you have no say in that. If it's on public property, then what you do is you go to the public political entity, whether it's your city council, town council, state government, and you address it at that level. With legislators making that decisions, with politicians making that decision, who are then held responsible in the next election if they don't make the decision that you think is appropriate. But that's the way it should be done in a country where law and order is respected. We should have zero tolerance for destruction of someone else's property. And again, this is not the trend. We know from the original riots in Baltimore in 2015. We know that when the mayor famously said we have to give people room to destroy, that is incorrect. It's un-American. We are a nation of law and order, and that has to be one of our foundation principles. And when we have leaders saying that destruction is appropriate in any way, shape, or form, that has crossed the line.
So, Congressman, President Trump has labeled Antifa as a terrorist organization. And as we see ongoing nightly violence in places like Portland, Oregon, what should the federal response be in dealing with this organization?
It is a domestic terrorist organization. There's no question about it. We shouldn't tolerate violent protesters who are masked to hide their identity, going into cities and stirring up what amounts to insurrection. Antifa and look, they're clear. They're honest about it. They want to overturn the American way of life and probably the American governmental system right now. That is insurrection. That's one of the purest definitions of insurrection. If the president has to institute the Insurrection Act or take actions under it, he should. We have to have zero tolerance for violent protests, especially ones that are backed by Antifa.
Congressman, we've seen it seems to be an unwillingness from the other side to actually speak out forcefully against Antifa and those who are sympathetic to Antifa. I saw just last night the mayor of Portland went to meet with the protesters and rioters and side with them, and it ended with him being heckled and driven out of the event, and they were chanting for him to resign as well. Is there at least some behind the scenes effort you're seeing, or behind the scenes unwillingness to just go along with the far left, pulling the Democrat Party, pulling Joe Biden, pulling the entire party towards that radical far left fringe? Is there anyone still truly moderate in the Democrat Party, I guess?
Well, I don't know, but I think this is going to be a very clear decision point in the November election. I mean, Americans are going to want to know, how do you stand Do you stand with the people, or do you stand with Antifa? And, Portland's an interesting, the case in Portland's very interesting because there's a mayoral race coming up this November, and the Democrat mayor is being challenged by a person who brags about being part of Antifa. So, it's like, which one of us is going to be more disrespectful of law and order? That has to end. And I think that Americans are going to ask the people before they go into the voting booth or vote by mail this November. They are going to ask tough questions, and one of the questions is: do you stand with us, or do you stand with the violent, terrorists who are now stalking our streets?
I think anyone who wants a just safe place to live and be left alone, that should be an easy question for them. Stay tuned, everyone, and we will be right back after this short break. And we're back with Congressman Andy Harris as we move on to the economy, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and the congressional response. Maria?
Thanks, Evan. So Congressman Harris, Senator Mitch McConnell mentioned this past Tuesday that a second round of stimulus checks is going to be talked about. What does this look like for the American people? And could you comment on anything that the House is doing with that?
Well, of course, the House took the ridiculous position that we need a $3 trillion stimulus and COVID package, which is what was passed out of the House. It was called the HEROES Act. I voted against it. We cannot spend $3 trillion more at this point. There's no indication that we need that amount of money. We're waiting to see what the Senate does. The rumor is that the Senate package will be, and I put it in quotes, a mere $1 trillion, which is a number that was really, you wouldn't even think about spending that amount of money in a what's called an emergency expenditure. But the key is going to be, I think, making sure that we do extend some unemployment benefits because, again, the government has basically shut down some businesses and basically thrown some people out of employment. So the government does have the responsibility of making those people almost whole. The idea of paying someone more on unemployment than they got working, I think, is a very bad idea for the American economy, and it's resulting in a much slower economic recovery than we otherwise would have had. So I think the new package has to have some unemployment benefit extension. I disagree. I don't think it needs local and state government help right now unless we put in very serious provisos that we are not bailing out states like Illinois and California, which are basically going to go bankrupt because of their luxurious spending and their overburdened pension systems in those states. We probably need some elements of money for education if it's going to be in classroom education, because if you conduct in classroom education now, you do have additional expenses for PPE and other things that have to be done. You may need more school buses, for instance, things like that. So there will be more money needed for that. But a school system that decides that they are not going to have in school teaching, I think should get no additional federal dollars. The bottom line is it's actually cheaper to educate a student if you don't have to open up a school and open up a classroom. So I'm not sure why any school system would need more money to educate online or distance education. Beyond those, there's probably going to be some amount of monies for some additional testing. And of course, if we need more money for vaccines or treatments, we should include that in the bill.
Congressman, I want to jump ahead, and as a doctor, you have a unique insight to this virus that many of your colleagues may not have. You have an understanding of it that most of us will never have. Can you tell us a little bit about, over this course of this pandemic, what you've learned about this virus as the news keeps changing? And could you also give us a little insight as to why it seems the experts, or the so-called experts, seem to contradict what their recent message was so many times, and it seems like over and over again, as things develop, what they've told us to do before seems to be the